Hey everybody, this is Recording Studio Loser. I am Resident Loser Jeremy. One of you guys commented on a post I made in the community page, which by the way, if you're not a part of it, subscribe down below because we like to chat back and forth and this is where you can get your questions answered. One of you put a really good series of questions on there dealing with clients who want to lowball you, how to market your studio, and how to price yourself. And we're gonna touch, I cannot do three. Why can't I hold up three fingers? Oh my gosh. There we go, three. But it got me all hot and bothered, so we're gonna go off on a rant. Ooh, okay, let's pull it up. So Jazzy Lamel wants to know more on the business and the marketing side of being a studio owner. How do you deal with people calling and the first question they ask is how much do you charge? That happens all the time. How do you market on a budget, especially in rural areas? What's the most effective way to bring in new clients? Great question. Critique studio websites and info. For example, people send you websites and links and you would give input on how to change or what to take out. If you guys want me to do that, let me know in the comments down below. Send me messages on Instagram. You can link me your studio pages. And if you want to do kind of a tearing your websites apart video, we can do that. How much to charge for your services and what's the threshold of being competitive and how to price yourself? What's too low? What's too high? Great questions. As I sat here and thought about it, it really got me off on a rant. So here is that rant. How to deal with people calling you and the first question they ask is, how much do you charge? First off, I feel like anybody with a business has dealt with this. People just bargain shopping, looking for literally the cheapest price that they can get what they want out of anyone. And our industry is no different. I get calls so much. And for the longest time, my wife didn't necessarily believe me that it was happening, that people would just call, ask how much I charge, and hang up the phone. I've learned since then, and depending on the season and the time of year, it happens multiple times per week. Sometimes multiple times per day. I've learned really quick as soon as somebody asks me that question, have you checked out my website? Which leads me to having a decent website. I have all the information laid out on my website, how much things cost, how you book the studio, and just really quickly knowing if that person has even worked to find that information or if they just literally Googled the studio and called the first one that was in line. Ultimately, what helps me in these situations is I've kind of priced myself out of the bargain shopper. I am not the cheapest place to record. On the flip side of that, nor am I the most expensive place to record, but I'm not the cheapest place to record, and I know that, and that's kind of by design. And that's not to say that I'm above low budgets, right? That's not it at all. There is great music that can be made in any price bracket, but there are consistently other issues that come with people who are just looking to bargain shop. If they're literally trying to get the cheapest thing they can, your creative work is part of this. Your stamp essentially is on this project. So if they're not willing to put in the money, 9 times out of 10, they're not willing to put in the time to make sure that that product is good. If you're not making much money on something, you have to get something else from the project. You have to be able to put in something because you really believe in the song, you believe in the artist, and you believe what they're trying to do. And that gives you something you can do, right? You can put that back on your website as something like, look at this work that I was able to do. I wasn't tied to a budget. So, and then that artist really allowed me to put my vision into what this thing is. Most of the time that doesn't happen. Most of the time, bargain shoppers are just trying to get in, get out. They don't care what it sounds like. So it's really doing nothing for me other than a headache. And don't get me wrong, there are definitely times bargain shoppers have turned into really, really good clients. We all have mental resources that we have available to us at any given time. So if you're pouring all these resources into something that gives you very little return, it's not really a good use of your time. Not to say everybody on a budget is a bad artist. You have to be able to pick through which ones are serious about their craft and which ones are really just trying to save $1 because they don't have another dollar. And in that case, I'm typically willing to work with that person, but normally those conversations on the phone don't start with how much do you charge? There's no other question. What type of music are you doing? Like, it's often so hard to start that conversation, and you can use that time to educate if you want to go down that road. Sometimes I'll ask, okay, have you looked at the website? Have you familiarized yourself with my pricing structures? Have you heard the sounds that we do? Have you looked at the pictures of the studio? Because if they're just calling around, they're probably not even comparing apples to oranges. A really, really pro space that cost over $100 an hour versus some guy with a Scarlett charging $24. Not to say you can't can't get a good project, but they're not the same thing. And the two spaces offer very different things. One is not meant to really beat the other. They're two completely different spaces. Ultimately, I don't know how to deal with that. It's something that we all just have to deal with, and it happens all the time. People looking to get the most for the cheapest amount of money, and it really depends how hungry you are if you're going to take those gigs. You can adjust your pricing. Then the question would lead to, how do you price yourself? There's a whole lot of market research that can go into something like that. Looking at what's available around you, how in demand your services are, how much value are you bringing to the clients that you're providing the services for. Then you would take a look at your website. How much information is there? Are you really kind of using your website to transform prospective clients into actual customers? Do you have sound examples on there that are really good examples of your work that you can stand behind and be proud of to then use as descriptions like, well, you want to pay this much, I charge this much. And if you go to the website and take a listen, you can see why I charge this much over here. Using kind of those things to justify to the customer, you can start to pull out if they really value good work or if they're truly just trying to find something that's the cheapest. The really, really hard ones are the ones who want to know how much it costs to make an album, and you know nothing other than that. Do we need players? Do you have songs? Do we need to take a look at arrangement? There are so many things that go into a question like that. And oftentimes it's the people who have a sudden inspiration to do something and a sudden inspiration to do a project, and they just don't know how to ask that question. They don't know how to start that. Set our industry aside for a minute when I'm asking questions about like cars. I know how to change oil, I know how to change tires, but there's certain work that needs to be done on cars that I just have no idea how that works. So when I'm starting to talk to a mechanic, they're probably like, good Lord, dude, you have no idea what's happening. I try to put myself into that position when I'm talking to individuals like that, where they just don't know, as a time to kind of educate, like, well, here's what happens in a normal project. Here's what I typically charge. There's not to say there's a million ways to make a record between here and there, but this is what's typical. And oftentimes that person goes to record with somebody else, and that's absolutely fine. I'm probably not the perfect spot for somebody to do their very, very first project. I'm not the cheapest place in the world. However, if you're kind to those people and you take that time to educate instead of really humiliate them, you can turn those people to become evangelistic for your business, and that definitely happens. That's happened multiple times. People talk. They talk a lot. Which brings me to another question that was asked by this same person. By the way, great questions. How to market on a budget, especially in a rural area, or what's the most effective way to bring in new clients? I'm arguably in a fairly rural area. I do absolutely no marketing. When I first started the studio, I did a lot of marketing. I tried mailers, I tried billboards, I tried stuff in the newspaper. I did just about everything. My father was also a business owner, so I got to see how he did his marketing, so I tried the same thing. But I quickly learned that having a studio, being audio related, it's a completely different market, and the same marketing does not work. I know a lot of people do Facebook ads. I know people do emailers. I do nothing. I do literally nothing. It can be argued at this point in the last year or so, YouTube has really been my main form of advertising, and it has definitely turned into that. I've gotten business from YouTube. It's definitely made that kind of first initial handshake with the client a little bit easier because they can see my personality, they can see how I work, they can see the space, and that's like the hardest part. I've found if I can get people here, I can get them to see the space, I can get them to listen to stuff, I can get them to hang out for a minute. It's a lot easier to turn that perspective job into an actual job, and YouTube's done that for me. But before YouTube, I still had a successful business, and in that instance, it was literally 100% word of mouth, and it really helps. Somebody else talking about your business is so much more effective than you talking about your business by yourself. So I've learned to kind of be quiet. I've learned to put out stuff when I want to, when there's really something to show, and just to kind of set it out there and let people talk about it themselves. But to really treat the customer the best I can possibly treat them, and then that turns that customer into a walking billboard, a walking mailer, a walking advertisement for my business. Really, that's budget as you can get, right? That's bootstrapping to the nines. I don't want to scare anybody away from advertising because I know it works for a lot of people. I have found it did not work for me in my area, and I am in a rural area. How much is too much money for your services? What's the threshold of being competitive and pricing yourself too low or too high? That's almost impossible to answer. It's a very, very good question, and you should be asking it yourself. I don't know that I can answer anything like that for anyone other than myself. I know what places around here charge. That gets different. If you drive a couple hours to the south and you hit Nashville, it's a completely different world. If you drive a couple hours northwest and you hit Chicago, it's a completely different world. If you drive a couple hours to Detroit, it's a completely different world. So I know my area, and I know what's made me competitive and choices that I've been able to make, just keeping my overhead as low as possible. But ultimately, you won't know your threshold unless you push it. Your services are only worth the value they bring to somebody else. That said, every single time that I've raised my prices, it's been a good thing. Now, that's obviously not going to work for everybody, and I'm not raising my prices crazy very often. I've raised my prices 3 times since I've been in this location in 10 years. I started out awfully low, just trying to get the studio name out there. I raised it, and I stayed there for probably 8 years. I've only recently in the last year raised my prices once again, and it was actually the first time raising the rate for the room, which has been the same since I opened it. So, and for repeat clients, I really charge them what they were charged the first time they came in, because in my mind, a repeat client is worth way more than trying to work to get a new client. So they'll pay what they paid the first time they came, and I can look back at invoices and see what that is. If they're looking for like a totally different type of project, then we kind of start to look at the details and figure out pricing. But new clients coming through the door, when they figure out the prices, and I have the website working for me too, I can see based on my web traffic how many people are visiting my studio's page, how many people are clicking on the rates page, and then how many immediately click off. But the ones who really stick on that rate page often go to the contact page. So the website is working for me like that. It's kind of sifting through clients that would otherwise go nowhere in that conversation. I have that working for me as a buffer. But really, when it comes down to pricing, too high, too low, figure out how much time you spend on a project, figure out what your competition is charging, figure out the value that you're bringing to a client. And if you have clients that you really, really trust, if you have clients that you have really good rapport with, straight up ask them, how much would you have paid for something like this? I remember the first time I raised my prices was when I had somebody come up from Nashville. We did a project. He loved it. He had a great time. We had players over here. It was really one of my first full albums, I think. I could be wrong. But he told me if I had stayed home in Nashville, I would be paying 4 to 5 times the cost of this project. There's no reason with a client that happy, who likes the project, who was stoked about the end result, and the price difference was that vast. I knew I had wiggle room to raise my price. It's in those instances where it's still hard. You gotta really take a leap of faith when that happens, but it's really just trial and error when it happens, honestly. Because you can set your price at something, and I have my prices set, but depending on the time of year, depending if I have a gap in the schedule, I may adjust my prices. I'm the business owner. I can do that. So my price is my price until it's not. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, guys, that's been a fun little rant. I'm Resident Loser Jeremy. I'll see you in the next one.